He stared down the barrel of his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. In his sights weren't enemy soldiers or war machines, or the monsters that roamed this godforsaken planet. They were two children. Two tiny, trembling alien children belonging to the very species that had taken everything from him. His orders, and his instincts, screamed at him to walk away. To let the jungle do its work. To let them disappear. But Silas Vance didn't pull the trigger. And he didn't walk away. What happened in the next 48 hours would break him, bleed him, and force him to face a nightmare worse than death. But it was the words these two children would scream at the very end. Those were the words that would stop his heart cold. You are not going to want to miss the ending of this one, folks. It's a roller coaster of survival and redemption that hits right in the feels. Before we dive into the dense jungles of planet Acheron, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button to help this story find more listeners, and if you love high-quality sci-fi storytelling, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell. Ready? Let's descend. The humidity on planet Acheron was heavy enough to drown in. It wasn't just heat, it was a physical weight, a oppressive blanket of sulfur and rotting vegetation that clung to Sergeant Silas Vance like a second skin. Silas was a man out of time. At 45 years old, he moved with the calculated, efficient lethality of a machine, but his joints ached with the ghosts of old injuries. He was a void marine, a veteran of the Interstellar Wars, a conflict that had burned across the galaxy for a decade. Now the war was technically over. The treaties were signed. The politicians back on Earth were shaking hands with the diplomats of the Zentar Dominion. But out here on the fringe worlds, the hate didn't sign treaties. The hate festered. Silas had chosen isolation. He lived in a repurposed drop pod scavenged from a battlefield, miles away from the nearest human settlement. He spent his days hunting, trapping, and trying to forget the sound of plasma fire melting through armor. He was a man who wanted to be left alone, a man who believed that humanity and the Zentar were like oil and water. Put them together and things burn. It was a Tuesday, or what passed for Tuesday under the twin suns of Acheron, when his solitude was shattered. Silas was tracking a mud boar near the Whispering Falls, a rare spot of beauty in this hellscape. The water cascaded down obsidian cliffs, creating a mist that momentarily cooled the air. He heard the snap of a twig. Not the heavy crash of a beast, but the clumsy, light footfall of something inexperienced. Silas didn't hesitate. He spun, his magnetic rifle snapping to his shoulder in a blur of motion. He expected a scavenger. He expected a predator. What he saw froze him in place. Huddled beneath the massive, fern-like fronds of a razor-leaf plant were two figures. They were small, barely reaching his waist. Their skin was a soft, iridescent violet, marked with faint bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with their heartbeat. Their eyes were large, solid pools of gold, wide with terrified recognition. Zentar. They were Zentar children. Twins. Silas lowered the weapon just an inch, his jaw tightening until his teeth creaked. He knew what they were instantly. The enemy. The monsters. He remembered the siege of Europa. He remembered seeing his squad wiped out by Zentar shock troopers who looked just like adult versions of these two terrified kids. The memories hit him like a physical blow. The smell of ozone. The screams. The absolute, cold indifference of the alien enemy. One of the twins, the girl he assumed based on the slightly finer facial ridges, stepped forward. She was trembling so hard the leaves around her shook. She raised a small four-fingered hand. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. She chirped something. The Zentar language was a mix of harmonics and clicks, but Silas had learned enough battlefield comms to understand the basics. She wasn't asking for food. She wasn't asking for mercy. She was saying, lost. Danger. Help. Silas stared at them. He looked at their violet skin, the skin of the things that had killed his brother. A dark, ugly feeling welled up in his chest. It was a cocktail of trauma and prejudiced rage that he had been nursing for 10 years. Get out of here, he growled, his voice like gravel grinding in a mixer. He spoke in Terran, harsh and guttural. The children flinched but didn't run. They couldn't run. Looking closer, Silas saw they were exhausted, their tunics torn, covered in the grime of the jungle. They were likely survivors of a transport crash, or maybe they had wandered away from a colony ship. The boy twin clutched his sister's arm, hiding behind her. Help! The girl clicked again, her golden eyes filling with moisture. Silas felt a war raging inside him. One part of him, the soldier, saw a threat. The other part, the human, saw two kids. But on this day the soldier won. The bitterness won. He spat on the ground, a glob of saliva landing inches from the girl's feet. I said get lost. I don't help your kind. He turned his back on them. It was the coldest thing he had ever done. He heard a soft whimper behind him, a sound of utter despair, but he forced his legs to move. He marched away from the waterfall, away from the violet skin and golden eyes, telling himself he was doing the right thing. They were the enemy. Nature would take its course. It wasn't his problem. He left them there, alone in the most dangerous jungle in the sector. He walked for a mile, his heart pounding a rhythm of anger and justification. They killed us, he thought. They started it. But as the distance grew, the silence of the jungle began to feel like an accusation. Silas didn't know it yet, but that decision, to walk away, was about to trigger a chain of events that would strip him down to his very soul. Silas marched for another hour, putting distance between himself and the waterfall. He tried to focus on the hunt. He checked his trackers, he monitored the wind direction, he scanned the canopy for threats. But he couldn't focus. Every time he blinked, he saw those golden eyes. Lost. Danger. Help. Shut up, he muttered to the empty air. He slashed at a vine with his machete, severing it with unnecessary violence. They're Zentar. They grow up to be killers. You save them now, they shoot a human in 10 years. That's the math. He was trying to convince himself. He was using the logic of war to suppress the logic of humanity. Suddenly the jungle went quiet. Any veteran knows that silence is louder than noise. When the insects stop buzzing and the birds stop calling, something is wrong. Silas froze, dropping into a crouch. His senses expanded. He smelled musk. A deep, rot-filled musk. From the undergrowth to his left, 3 ripper wolves emerged. These weren't like earth wolves. They were reptilian, covered in scales, with jaws that could snap a femur like a twig. They were pack hunters, intelligent and cruel. They circled him, sensing his distraction. Silas didn't panic. Panic gets you killed. He exhaled slowly, raising his rifle. Bam! The first shot took the lead wolf in the eye. It dropped instantly. The other 2 lunged. Silas dropped the rifle, too close for shooting, and drew his combat knife. He sidestepped the second wolf, driving the blade into its flank. The third one clipped him, its claws tearing through his fatigue pants, drawing blood from his thigh. He roared, a primal sound, and pistol-whipped the beast with the heavy handle of his knife. It yelped and scrambled back. Breathing heavily, Silas stood over the carcasses. He was bleeding. Adrenaline coursed through him. He walked over to a small, stagnant pool of water to wash the alien blood off his hands. He looked down into the water. The surface was still, acting like a dark mirror. Silas saw himself. He saw the scar running down his left cheek. He saw the gray in his beard. But mostly he saw his eyes. They were hard. Cold. Dead. I am a monster, the thought whispered in his mind. It wasn't the wolves that made him a monster. It wasn't the Zentar he had killed in the war. It was the fact that he had left 2 children, 5 years old, maybe 6, to be eaten by things like these wolves. He looked at the dead predators. The twins wouldn't last 5 minutes against a pack of ripper wolves. I'm a monster, he said aloud. The words tasted like ash. He remembered his own father back on Earth. His dad used to say, Silas, a man is defined by who he protects, not who he fights. Silas had spent 10 years fighting. He hadn't protected anyone in a long time. A wave of shame washed over him, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. It was a nausea of the soul. He realized that if he walked back to his drop pod now, if he sat down and ate his dinner while those kids died in the dark, he would lose the last scrap of humanity he had left. He would be no better than the war machines. He gripped his knife until his knuckles turned white. Damn it, he hissed. He spun around. The pain in his leg was forgotten. The hunt was forgotten. Silas Vance broke into a run. Not away from danger but towards it. He ran back the way he came, tearing through the foliage. He checked his chrono. It had been 90 minutes. In the Acheron jungle, 90 minutes was a lifetime. Please be there, he thought. Please be alive. He wasn't running to save the enemy anymore. He was running to save himself. As he neared the waterfall, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It wasn't the chirping of the children. It was a low, vibrating thrum. A sound like rocks grinding together deep underground. Silas skidded to a halt at the edge of the clearing. The twins were there. They had climbed up onto a large boulder near the water, huddled together, shaking. But standing between them and the jungle was death incarnate. It was a hexstalker. A massive, 6-legged arachnid reptile hybrid, standing 8 feet tall. Its armor was thick, chitinous plating that could deflect small arms fire. Its mandibles dripped with a neurotoxic venom that liquefied prey from the inside out. The hexstalker was clicking its mandibles, tasting the air. It smelled fear. It smelled the sweet scent of the Zentar children. The girl Lyra held her brother Orion tight, shielding him with her small body. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the end. Silas didn't think. He didn't calculate. He didn't strategize. He let out a roar of pure, defiant fury and charged into the clearing. The Hex Stalker spun around, its multiple eyes locking onto the charging human. It hissed, a sound like steam escaping a high-pressure valve. Silas opened fire. Crack, crack, crack. The magnetic rounds sparked off the creature's heavy shoulder plating. It was like shooting a tank with a BB gun. But it got the beast's attention. "Over here, you ugly son of a..." Silas screamed, strafing to the right to draw the creature away from the boulder. The stalker lunged, covering 20 feet in a single leap. Silas dove rolling through the mud. A massive, serrated claw slammed into the ground where he had been a split second before, digging a trench in the earth. Silas scrambled up, firing into the softer tissue of the creature's underbelly. Violet ichor sprayed out, sizzling where it hit the ground. The monster screeched, a sound that shattered the air. It thrashed, one of its rear legs catching Silas in the chest. The impact was like being hit by a wrecking ball. Silas flew backward, smashing into a tree. He heard ribs crack. His rifle flew out of his hand, skittering away into the brush. He gasped for air, tasting copper. His lungs were burning. The Hex Stalker loomed over him, raising two of its front scythe legs for the killing blow. "No!" a tiny voice screamed. Silas looked up through blurry vision. The little Zentar girl Lyra had thrown a rock. A tiny, useless rock that bounced off the monster's leg. It was a hopeless gesture, but it was brave. The monster hesitated, confused by the tiny prey fighting back. That second was all Silas needed. He grabbed a flare from his belt, a high-intensity magnesium emergency flare. He ripped the tab and ignited it. A blinding white light, burning at 2,000 degrees, erupted in his hand. With a grunt of effort, Silas lunged forward, jamming the burning flare directly into the creature's cluster of sensitive eyes. The Hex Stalker screamed. It thrashed blindly, retreating from the agony. Silas didn't stop. He drew his combat knife, a 10-inch blade of serrated carbon steel. He jumped onto the creature's back, holding on to the chitinous plates like a rodeo rider on a bull from hell. He drove the knife down. Once, twice. He aimed for the gap in the armor at the base of the neck. The beast bucked, slamming Silas against the tree again, tearing at his back. He felt his skin rip. The pain was blinding. But he held on. Die. Silas gritted out, driving the blade in one last time, twisting it with all his remaining strength. The knife severed the spinal cluster. The Hex Stalker shuddered, convulsed, and then collapsed with a ground-shaking thud. Silence returned to the clearing. Silas rolled off the carcass, landing hard in the mud. He lay there, staring up at the alien sky. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts. His ribs were broken. His leg was mangled. He tried to sit up, but the world spun. Then he felt small hands on him. Lyra and Orion were there. They weren't running away. They were kneeling beside him. Their golden eyes were wide, not just with fear now, but with awe. Silas coughed, spitting blood. "You kids, okay?" Lyra nodded frantically. She reached out and touched the blood on his arm. She made a soft, cooing sound. "We have to move," Silas wheezed, forcing himself to sit up. "The smell of this blood. More will come." He tried to stand, but his leg gave out. He groaned. Orion, the boy who hadn't spoken a word, wedged his small shoulder under Silas's arm. Lyra took the other side. They were too small to carry him, but the gesture gave him the strength to push himself up. "Okay," Silas whispered, looking at his two little enemies. "Okay, let's go." The next 12 hours were a blur of agony and survival. Silas knew they couldn't make it back to his drop pod. It was too far and he was losing too much blood. They needed to find a defensible position for the night. He led them to a small cave system he had scouted months ago, tucked behind a curtain of thick vines. Inside, Silas collapsed against the cold stone wall. His vision was tunneling. The infection from the Ripper Wolf bite earlier, combined with the toxins on the Hex Stalker's claws, was starting to set in. He was burning up with fever. But he couldn't rest. Not yet. He looked at the twins. They were huddled in the corner watching him. "Come here," he rasped. They crept closer. "If I pass out," Silas said, pointing to his belt, "you take this." He tapped the emergency transponder. "You press the red button. It sends a signal. Maybe someone friendly hears it." He knew it was a lie. No one friendly was listening. But he needed to give them hope. He spent the next few hours teaching them. He became a drill instructor, but instead of yelling, he whispered. This root, he showed them a tuber from his pack. You can eat this, but peel the skin. The skin makes you sick. Lyra mimicked him, peeling the imaginary skin with her nimble fingers. Water, Silas said. Don't drink from the stream. Drink from the moss. Squeeze it like this. He was transferring a lifetime of survival skills in a crash course. He was preparing them for his death. As night fell, the temperature dropped. The jungle grew cold. The twins were shivering in their thin tunics. Silas didn't hesitate. He unclasped his heavy thermal cloak, his military-issue blanket that had kept him warm on a dozen frozen moons. He draped it over them. But you, cold? Lyra said, her Terran broken and clumsy. I'm burning up, kid. Silas managed a weak smile. I don't need it. He watched them snuggle under his cloak, the symbol of the army that had fought their people. Under that blanket they weren't Zentar. They were just kids. Orion looked at Silas. Papa? He asked softly. Silas's heart clenched. No, not Papa. Just Silas. Silas, Orion repeated. Meanwhile, miles away, a different drama was unfolding. Kale and Lyra, the parents of the twins, were moving through the jungle with the speed of desperate predators. Kale was a massive Zentar warrior, broad-shouldered and lethal. Lyra was a healer, but her eyes burned with a mother's fury. They had found the waterfall. They had found the footprints. Kale knelt by the mud. He saw the heavy boot prints of a human, a Terran soldier, and next to them the small, stumbling prints of his children. Then he found the blood. It was everywhere. The site of the battle with the Hex Stalker was painted in gore. To Kale's eyes, panic blinded his logic. He didn't see a battle with a beast, he saw a massacre. The human took them, Kale growled, baring his teeth. He hurt them. Look at the blood. Lyra touched the earth, sensing the vibrations. They are ahead. Moving slow. I will kill him, Kale swore, drawing his plasma blade. I will peel the flesh from his bones for touching them. They picked up the trail, the drag marks of Silas's injured leg. To them it looked like he was dragging a body. Back in the cave, Silas was fading. The fever dreams were starting. He saw his old squadmates. He saw the faces of the Zentar he had killed. But then the faces changed. He saw Lyra offering him water. He saw Orion sleeping under his cloak. He realized in his delirium that the hatred was gone. It had drained out of him along with his blood. Stay quiet, he whispered to the darkness. Stay safe. He closed his eyes, accepting that he probably wouldn't open them again. Dawn broke with a pale, gray light filtering into the cave. Silas jolted awake. He was alive but barely. His body felt like lead. A sound outside. Heavy footsteps. Not an animal. Bipedal. Silas forced his eyes open. The twins were asleep, curled up against his good side for warmth. Wake up, Silas hissed, shaking them gently. Lyra's eyes snapped open. Someone's here, Silas whispered. He grabbed his pistol, his last weapon. He checked the mag. 3 rounds. He dragged himself to the mouth of the cave. He had to draw fire away from the kids. Stay down, he ordered them. Silas stumbled out into the clearing in front of the cave. He used the rock face to hold himself up. He looked like a wreck, bloodied, bandaged, pale as a ghost. But he held the gun steady. From the tree line 2 figures emerged. Kale and Lyra. They stopped 10 yards away. Kale saw the human. He saw the blood on Silas's clothes. He saw the gun. Kale roared, a sound of pure grief and rage. He raised his plasma rifle, aiming directly at Silas's chest. Monster! Kale screamed in broken Terran. Where are they? What did you do? Silas didn't try to explain. He knew how this looked. He knew he was a dead man. But if he could keep them focused on him, maybe they wouldn't shoot into the cave blindly. There. Silas started to say safe, but he coughed, doubling over. Die, human. Kale's finger tightened on the trigger. The energy coil on his rifle began to whine, charging up for the kill shot. Silas closed his eyes. He didn't raise his gun. He was too tired. He had protected them. That was enough. Whoosh. Suddenly 2 small blurs shot out of the cave. No. Papa, no. Lyra and Orion sprinted across the clearing. But they didn't run to their parents. They ran to Silas. They threw themselves in front of the human soldier, spreading their small arms wide. They became a living shield between the executioner and the condemned. Kale froze. He jerked the rifle barrel up just in time to avoid hitting his own children. Lyra? Orion. Lyra gasped, dropping her medical kit. The jungle went silent. Kale stared, confused. "Move aside," he commanded. "He is a monster. He hurt you." And then Lyra spoke. She was crying, tears streaming down her violet cheeks, but her voice was strong. "No," she screamed. "He is the pack. He is the shield. The stalker came for us. The big monster. Silas fought it. He bled for us, Papa. The monster wanted to eat us and Silas stood in the way." The words hit Kale like a physical slap. He lowered the gun an inch. Then Orion, the quiet one, stepped forward. He pointed to the heavy military cloak that was still draped around his shoulders, the human cloak. "He was cold," Orion sobbed, "but he gave us his warmth. He gave us his food. He kept the dark away, Papa. He saved us. He gave us his warmth." Those words hung in the air. Kale looked at the human. He looked past the uniform, past the weapon, past the scars of the war. He saw the thermal cloak on his son. He saw the wounds on Silas's body, wounds taken to defend alien children. Kale's weapon clattered to the ground. The rage drained out of the Zentar warrior's face, replaced by a look of profound shock and shame. Lyra ran forward, pushing past Kale. She didn't go to her children first. She went to Silas. Silas slumped against the rock, sliding down. "They're okay," he whispered to the mother. "I kept him safe." Lyra, the healer, knelt beside the human who had killed her people in the war. She placed her glowing hands on his chest. "Be still, warrior," she said softly. "You have paid the blood debt. Now let us heal you." They didn't leave him there. Kale carried Silas, the human soldier, back to their transport. They treated his wounds with their advanced medicine. They saved his life just as he had saved the twins. When they parted ways 3 days later at the edge of the human zone, there were no speeches. Kale simply took a small, carved totem from around his neck, a Zentar symbol of family and honor, and pressed it into Silas's hand. "No longer enemy," Kale said. "Brother." Silas watched their ship ascend into the sky. He stood alone in the jungle, but the crushing weight of the isolation was gone. He looked at the reflection in his knife blade one last time. The monster was gone. Only the man remained. Wow. Just wow. It really shows that even in the darkest corners of the universe, compassion is the strongest weapon we have. If Silas's journey touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that it's never too late for redemption. And if you haven't already, subscribe and check out our playlist for more incredible sci-fi stories like this one. What would you have done in Silas's shoes? Would you have walked away? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars.